Why did I do that? I'm probably going to edit this anyway. Either way, welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. Probably not going to edit it. Gonna be honest. I'm tired. I just had a long day at work. And I've just gotten out of seeing Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which I had pre-thoughts planned for this. But the screening I went to was a little later than I thought it was going to be. So, here we are. But what we're here to talk about is how, why, I don't know how to describe this movie, because, like, on the one hand, maybe it's just going into it, I had such low expectations, mostly stemming from that second trailer, that I think it's just that, and then when I saw this, I was like, oh shit, like, this is not as bad a movie as I went into it expecting. Like, I expected a much worse movie having seen this, like having seen that second trailer. Now, the movie's not terrible. It's not great. It's just kind of okay. I'd say I enjoyed it less than Quantumania, but only by a little bit, not by a huge margin. And Quantumania probably only has the enjoyment that it does because of Kang. Now, with this, I don't know what I really expected going into it, to be completely honest, because I went into it with, I know I went in with low expectations, because that trailer looked just god-awful, and nothing about that trailer felt like it was something that was going to be an entertaining movie to see at any point. And I think my biggest issue with this, and this is the spoiler-free part, I'll play the spoiler warning when we get into the spoilered portion, but for me with this movie, I walked into it, I think the problem is, I keep saying I walked into it, the issue is the movie feels like it should have been better set up. Like, a lot of what happens in this movie feels like it belongs somewhat in the last one, somewhat in a second one between that one and this one, because there are character arcs that don't really mean too much, because we don't have the attachment to the character. Billy's arc in this movie is he has finally found a family, and he wants to keep it as close together as possible, so, like, he's ruining everyone else's lives to do it, and then he has to learn to let go. But I don't think we saw enough of Billy in the last movie, or like, in between, to make that really, like, that pendulum swing completely in the opposite direction doesn't really work, I don't think. Because you don't have a movie in the middle where that's happening. I think it comes down to the fact that Mary is getting ready to go away to college in the last movie, and we're only a few months later here, and then now Billy's going to be 18. Like, the timeline's a little weird, and that was something that I was sitting there, I was like, wait, this seems a little off. That's not the biggest issue in the world. I don't have a huge problem with timelines like that. Like, I can live with an inconsistent timeline. It's just when the timeline is kind of key to the emotional arc of the movie, that's where I kind of have to take a step back and be like, you gotta line this up a little bit better. I think that's kind of the issue there. And I think that, like, you know, now they're heroes, and the city of Philadelphia doesn't like them, which the city of Philadelphia doesn't like anyone, so why would we be surprised by that? And I at the end of the day, like, those are my big issues with the movie, is that, like, things like that don't line up. There's a character arc involving Freddy that I think also doesn't line up, which I'll talk about more in the spoiler portion, but that's more because it feels like the last movie should have done a little bit more groundwork in that regard, but it just didn't. So this movie starts doing all the heavy lifting, which I feel like this isn't the first time I've had that complaint this year, where it's like, I think it was Creed 3, when I saw that, where I was like, the last movie should have done a little bit more of the heavy lifting to establish Damien's story, and it didn't. And then this movie has to do all the work to establish not only what Adonis is going through, but also Damien, and also everything else that has to happen in the movie. It's a lot of work for it to do. And as such, you can get a little bogged down. Because then what happens is, as that arc happens, it doesn't feel right. And it also feels like at a certain point, someone says something where you're like, oh, something was cut. Because these two characters interacted before this point, and it's kind of, like, and that's not reflected here. There's a cameo in the movie that I think is a little bit wasted, and I think that, like, overall, the movie's enjoyable, even if the plot's a little nonsensical. So without further ado, we'll move into the spoiler-free portion of the spoiler-filled portion of it. Now, my question is, at what point did they decide to have Athena, and Thea be here? Because that's what I was talking about before. I think Anthea is the real issue here, where her relationship with Freddy is so quick to be established while she's masquerading as Anne. And it's like, okay, they're hanging out together. There's no indication that, like, oh, these two were hanging out at some point. Let's just send her here and have her do that. Otherwise, it just comes off as convenience in this movie, which is like, all right, whatever, we can deal with that, but it's just kind of weird. And then, like, for that relationship to escalate the way it does, and then for the two of them to have that romantic entanglement that causes Anthea to flip sides, it feels a little forced. Like, it feels like an arc that you're going through because you expect it to go through that arc, not because it's organically going that way. Which is a problem. That's not how you should do a movie. Your characters should not be feeling like they're on a roller coaster or on a train getting through their character arc because that's what you expect from it. And I think that's kind of a fundamental problem with this movie. There's also the problem where it's like none of the Daughters of Atlas's plan is really ever explained in an easy to understand way, where it's just kind of like it continually exposited as it goes along, and it's like, can we just move it along? It reminds me a little bit of Steppenwolf in the Theatrical Justice League, and I'm like, it's a little weird where it's just like we're going to continually do it. I mean, granted, like, Lucy Liu is obviously having the time of her life in this fucking movie, and like it's very obvious that they're not even making an attempt to make it look like Helen Mirren is the one in, like, it's just so jarring. And the effects are just, there are times in this movie where the effects are just awful, and you're like, why is that? Why are the effects this bad in this movie? Like, I don't think it's properly, a lot of times, like, this movie feels too big for the budget, which is a fundamental problem with the movie. If you can't do the story with the effects required at the budget you're expecting, then why are you bothering to an extent? Why not scale down and try a little bit different? That's what I would say. Like, that's what someone should have said. Like, scale back the movie. You don't have to do this huge effect spectacle, especially on. I would assume this movie has a sub-$100 million budget. That's what I would assume based on just what this movie looks like. I don't think they gave. I mean, I think the first Shazam was like what, $65 million. Like, I don't think they gave this movie $250, which is like, it's kind of in that regard like Ant-Man, where it's like the first two Ant-Mans are relatively cheap, and then they made the new one, and it's incredibly expensive, and it's like, well, what were you expecting to happen? You weren't going to get the same returns you did last time. Either way, like, it feels like there should have been a movie in the middle, because, like, the issue is, like, with Billy, with the whole thing, with the feeling like he has family, but not acknowledging the mother and keeping them at arm's length, it's not really doing enough to get to the end of the movie where you're like, oh, okay, like, I understand why Billy has this, attachment to this family, considering, again, it's only been like 1 or 2 months since the last movie. At least that's how it's interpreted, because it's not like, they make it, unless we're saying it's real time, but, like, they don't make it seem like it's real time. Like, there are times where they do both, where they make it seem like it's been the real 5 years in between, and then there are times where they just kind of don't acknowledge it, and they just make it seem like it's been, like, 20 minutes. Like, it's just kind of silly, where it's like, I don't know when this is supposed to take place, but even if it is the 5 years, it makes his unwillingness to call the foster mom even weirder, considering how attached he is to everyone else in the family. And I don't think it's really ever addressed properly either, to make it kind of fit into the overall narrative. And by the time you get to the end, it's just a CGI clusterfuck, and I think that, like, and again, this is the big spoiler, is Wonder Woman making an appearance to resurrect Billy, and it's like, number one, when her theme played, I was like, man, it's gonna suck if this is the last time we get her theme in a movie, because that theme is great, and she's also great as Wonder Woman. So and her costume this time is, great too. It looks more like the 1984 costume, which, for the faults of that movie, it is she does have a great costume in it. And again, I'm kind of conflicted on the movie, because, like, I didn't walk out hating it, but I also didn't love it. Like, it's just kind of like middle of the road, which is like when I saw Shazam the first time back in 2018, I walked out of that movie being like, holy shit, this is great. I think part of it comes from you don't get an emotional resolution that is equal to, him talking to his mom after he finally finds her. Like, you don't get that moment where it's like, okay, we are going to, sit here, I guess, unpack, like, oh no, I didn't accidentally lose you, I didn't want to find you. Like, that is kind of the big, deal here, where it's like, you don't get something like that, where it's like, and for Billy to have that resolve to be like, no, like, I've been looking for this family the wrong way the whole time, now now I'm going to find, now I have my new family, for that whole situation there isn't a, like, they try to play him calling, I think her name is Paula, mom. Like, they try to play that as that moment, but that's again a third movie thing, where at the end of last movie, he's just now acknowledging that his family isn't the one he was born into, but the one he has found along the way. For this, it's not, when we get to the beginning and he does that thing where he calls her Paula as he's walking out, and it's like, it's a weird thing to have happen. It's such a weird thing to have happen. Because it's, you have the, what's it called? You have, like, it kind of subverts what happened there, and then it's like, especially considering it comes after the scene where he's talking to the therapist, and or the pediatrician, and the pediatrician, and he's like, I finally found this family that I really love, but it's like, that last step of calling her mom, he was a step he was unwilling to take, yet he's willing to completely destroy Mary's life, or at least divert Mary's life for his own needs. Just he like, she doesn't go to college to kind of help him out and stay home with him, and it's such a weird decision. And it's like, and the thing is too, it's like, again, it doesn't have the benefit of having seen the intervening years, but I feel like that would have alleviated a lot of these issues that I have. Where it's like, especially considering that, like, introducing, even if they had started where he's like, where Freddy is dating Anne, like, and they had been together for a while, like, that would have worked a little bit better than they meet for the first time in this movie, to the point where it's like, oh, and here's this other random person, like, that we've never met before, that he's just now meeting for the first time, like, who could this be? Like, and it's like, they talk about, oh, there's a third sister, and it's like, okay, well, whatever. And that's notwithstanding, I wish we can go back to the days of mysterious casting, where it's like, say what you will about Steven Yeun over at Marvel, we don't know who he's playing officially. I think it's speculated heavily that he's playing Sentry, but we don't know who he's playing specifically. Like, Marvel announces Jonathan Majors is playing Kang the Conqueror. This movie, again, it's like, oh, the Daughters of Atlas are being played by Helen Mirren, Lucy Liu, and Rachel Zegler. So it's like, once Rachel Zegler shows up on screen, you're like, oh, she's a bad guy. These are announcements that they shouldn't have made in advance. These are things that should have, happened before this. It's such a weird choice. And now, having seen this, I do understand why they didn't market Wonder Woman as in the movie. Because it's such a small scene. But look, the movie's not bad. And in terms of a rating, I would say, depending on your love of the first Shazam movie, because the first Shazam movie has the same kind of comedic spirit as the first Shazam movie. Assuming you have assuming you're wide, if you liked that movie and you want more, then I think this might be a movie worth watching as a 4. If not, I don't think there's anything about it that's particularly need to see in theater, unless you want to hear Wonder Woman's theme in a movie theater one last time, because they're probably going to reboot. See, and that's the thing too. It's like the post-credit scene, or the not post-credit scene, but the scene right before the end with Wonder Woman. Like, it's like, oh, and now the magic's back, and now the gods are going to start returning too. It feels like this movie is designed to integrate into the new DC. Like, it feels like he's going to be continuing on, Zachary Levi and the rest of his cast. I think there's a very strong possibility. Like, I think that, here's the thing. I think we didn't get news on those other characters because they didn't want to say, oh, they're definitely coming back, and then if this movie bombed, they were going to say, oh, no. But I think this movie was very poorly marketed, and I think that's a fundamental problem that I have with this movie, almost out of the gate on it. I have a problem like that. That I think was the thing that really soured me and a lot of people on it, where it's like, you look at that second trailer, you're like, oh, this looks awful. But it's not, like, it's consistent in its tone, which is more than can be said about a lot of other movies in the last few years, where it's like, it's trying to be funny, it's trying to be serious, it's trying to do a little bit of everything, and none of it actually lands. And if you look at it from a more broad kind of, what this movie does wrong, it's really more just the central, I mean, to say the narrative is wrong is kind of wonky, feels like a huge thing, but it's really not a huge deal for what this movie is, which is, it's meant to be more of a comedy, I guess. So maybe the general narrative is not the most important thing, as long as the movie works from beginning to end, which it does, so I guess it's a moderate success. But I think we've just about covered everything there is to talk about with Shazam, Fury of the Gods. I'll say, you know what? I'll say it. It's a 4. It's a watch it in a theater, but don't worry about going opening night. It's not a movie that you need to see opening night. There's nothing about it that, you're going to be spoiled, I don't think. If you've listened to this point, then you probably have already been spoiled on the big things. But the spoilers won't impact your enjoyment of the movie. There are plenty of great comedic bits with all the characters, and it makes it worth watching. But we'll wrap up there for today. And tomorrow morning, we will be back with the next episode of The Bad Batch. So until then, have a great rest of your week.